There are those who want the U.S. and Iran to settle, and there are those who want regime change. Among the latter, there's Israel, of course. And then there's the United Arab Emirates, who've signaled OPEC's cautious response as a reason for quitting the cartel. The end of OPEC? How will its biggest producer, Saudi Arabia, respond? The Emirates also seem to have it in for Saudi Arabia's ally, Pakistan, suddenly demanding the immediate reimbursement of a $3.5 billion loan from the cash-strapped facilitators of U.S.-Iran mediation efforts. How did Pakistan emerge as a central player? What are the benefits and risks when you raise your hand to facilitate dialogue between sworn enemies, particularly when one is your neighbor and the other a global superpower that can, for instance, if it wanted to, scuttle an IMF bailout if relations go sour? At the heart of it all is the powerful chief of the military, Field Marshal Asim Munir. He knows Iran well from his time as head of intelligence and has infuriated India by ingratiating himself with Donald Trump. But what if the U.S. president turns out to be a fair-weather friend? And can the art of the deal bring down prices at the pump for ordinary Pakistanis? They've been left reeling by the blockade in the Strait of Hormuz. Today in the France 24 debate, we're looking at Pakistan in the middle. Joining us from Toronto, Canada, Bilal Khan, founder of Kuwa Defense News. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
From New York City, Surabhi Gupta, South Asia editor at New Lines Magazine. Thanks for joining us.
Happy to be here.
Jean-Luc Racine is researcher at the Asia Center think tank and with the CNRS, the French public research facility arm. Thank you for being with us here.
Pleasure.
On the go, by the way, you can listen to the show wherever podcasts are streamed. Yeah, let's begin with the Emiratis. Their energy minister insisting that Tuesday's decision to quit OPEC's got absolutely nothing to do with Saudi Arabia, insisting the energy minister, Mohammed al-Muzrai, insists that the decision to leave was purely to help meet rising global energy demand. A few days previous, though, the top advisor to UAE President Mohammed bin Zayed Al Nahyan, aka MBZ, was less diplomatic with his grievances.
The countries of the Gulf Cooperation Council have supported one another logistically, but politically and militarily, I believe their position has historically been the weakest. I would expect such a weak stance from the Arab League, but it surprises me from the GCC.
Surabhi Gupta, let me begin with you. What was your reaction when this news hit us on Tuesday about the UAE quitting OPEC?
I think one could see the differences. There were things brewing. The rift between Saudi and UAE had, been a long time coming. So this was pretty much, a part of that. And yeah.
All right, something that was expected. Well, joining us now from Doha to join, and we thank him for being with us in this conversation, is Bashar El-Halabi, senior energy markets correspondent for Argus Media. First off, is this the end of OPEC?
Well, first of all, thank you for hosting me. Is this the end of OPEC? The straight answer for the short term is definitely not. We already have multiple countries that came out today, heavyweights within the OPEC Plus alliance. First off was Russia, followed by Kazakhstan, and shortly, like minutes ago, Algeria issued a statement reaffirming its commitment to the group in general. So, and I expect further countries to follow suit as well and issue similar statements. So in the short term, this is not definitely not the end of OPEC Plus. However, it's not to be taken very lightly, the exit by the UAE, because the UAE in recent years has been investing, majorly investing in improving and increasing its production capacity. And the bigger your production capacity, the larger your influence was, whether within the OPEC Plus alliance or on the global energy markets. The UAE is aiming to produce 5 million barrels per day in 2027. its production capacity at the moment is around 4.85 million barrels per day. And in recent years, the UAE has been pushing for higher quotas within the group in order to be more reflective of its investment and of its production capacity. It has actually received 2 upward revisions for its quotas, but from a UAE's perspective, this was not enough, and it was not proportional to their ability to produce in general. Yeah. Now, the OPEC is aware of that. The de facto leader of OPEC is also aware of this. This is why at the beginning of this year, OPEC Plus issued an assessment. They hired an independent American company, independent energy company, and its role throughout 2026 was supposed to go around OPEC members and test their maximum production capacities in general. And the OPEC ministers were scheduled to meet by the end of this year, perhaps at the beginning of December, and agree on new quotas reflective of every country's production capacity. And this exercise was supposed to start happening on a yearly basis in order to ensure a fair and equitable distribution of production quotas within the group. This is why the UAE's decision yesterday definitely is multi-layered. There are multiple reasons for it. One of which is, according to what the UAE is saying, it's a business decision. It wants to sell more oil.
It's a business decision, but it's also about politics. And, but let's talk about, because the war in Iran has, of course, triggered an energy crisis, different precincts with different views on the UAE's departure from OPEC. We could show you the headline from India Today's website. It says, bluntly, good news for India. UAE can now send more oil via Fujairah, bypassing Hormuz. Fujairah, as in the Habshan-Fujairah pipeline, which gives the Emirates a leg up on neighbors like Kuwait, Qatar, and others who are almost entirely beholden to the Strait for their exports. You see, this pipeline means they go around the Strait of Hormuz. So to hear you explain it to us, Bashar, this is a commercial decision to some extent, but we heard in that clip at the outset grievance over what the Emirates think is the weak response to Iran. The UAE wants regime change by the looks of it.
What I can say are 2 things. First of all, this is definitely, and I mentioned this, it's a multi-layered decision. There's the business angle, there's the trade angle, and there's also the politics angle and the multilateral angle. We're going to discuss that. But when it comes to the ability to bypass the Strait of Hormuz, the UAE has actually invested a lot of money, just like the Saudi Arabia has done that through its East-West pipeline, which has given both countries a leg up over, as you mentioned, other countries in order to bypass the chokehold that's now surrounding the Strait of Hormuz. And it's allowing them to continue to supply global energy markets, albeit at lower volumes, but still continuing to play a role in supplying those markets. So when it comes to the political side of things, I can also say that there has been two schools of thought in the UAE over the past 5-6 years regarding their membership within OPEC. One school of thought used to always argue, let's continue to invest in our production capacity, let's raise it, and let's negotiate within the group for larger quotas. And this has been, from a UAE perspective, this has been tried and tested. The other perspective argues that we are ahead of everyone in terms of diversifying our economy, tourism, trade, transportation, airports, etc. We don't depend on a very high break-even price to finance our budgets. We can live with lower prices. Let us sell as much energy, whether it's gas, whether it's oil, whether oil products. Let us sell as much as we can now, and let us use this money to invest in what they call creating the economies of the future. Most prominently among that is investing in AI. They believe that they want to be one of top 3 or top 5 countries investing in AI. They want to be a gateway to the global south when it comes to AI, and this is why they believe they want more revenues. Now, of course, the grievances are true, they are there. They have been voiced openly by UAE officials, and the tensions between them and Saudi Arabia are there. They happen. They came out to the open prior to the war, and they continue to resurface now, even while we still are in a state of war, but it's no war, no peace as well. But what I would say is the UAE's exit from OPEC is more of a failure of multilateralism in the world than it's just a failure of a relationship between two neighbors.
Between two neighbors, it's not. It's about more than two neighbors. And what we've seen over the last 2 months is how the whole of the Gulf region seems more vulnerable than it was before. What with missiles raining down across the Gulf. Right now, it's all of Asia that's reeling from the dramatic drop in crude exports. Pakistan last year got 93% of its crude from Gulf states, with some 80% of that went through the Strait of Hormuz. That's just oil. Qatar and the United Arab Emirates account for 99% of Pakistan's liquefied natural gas imports, 72% of Bangladesh's, 53% of India's. This is according to consultancy Kepler data. Now, twice in the past month, Pakistan's government had to raise prices at the pump. And this comes after a politically painful belt-tightening in the wake of an IMF bailout. Pakistan's weekly oil import bill has surged by about 167%, though this means pain for ordinary citizens.
Whatever good the government has done was undone after the outbreak of the Iran war. Under pressure, they raised petrol prices, and the poor man has been crushed.
And the last thing cash-strapped Pakistan needed was creditors calling in debts. We've been talking about the UAE in this show. The United Arab Emirates surprising Islamabad earlier this month when it demanded that its once close ally fully reimburse a $3.5 billion loan, according to the Financial Times. 3 Pakistani advisors said the UAE had signaled to Islamabad that it wanted to take a harder line against Iran, that it was about the politics. The UAE's foreign ministry did not respond to the FT for comment. In the UAE's stead, writes the newspaper, Saudi Arabia, which signed a mutual defense pact with Islamabad last year, swung to its rescue. It lent $3 billion to Pakistan to bolster its central bank's reserves. So it makes up most of it, Bilal Khan, but not all. Once again, we're seeing here that there's politics at play when it comes to relations between the UAE, its neighbor Saudi Arabia, and Saudi Arabia's ally, Pakistan.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, it's worth sort of contextualizing the background here is that at the end of the day, especially in recent years, Saudi Arabia and UAE have been neck and neck in terms of trying to establish themselves as the regional leader, at least within the Gulf states or among them. So seen Pakistan sign a defense agreement with Saudi Arabia and then, take a ostensibly softer stance with Iran, certainly did not gel well with the UAE. However, that being said, I would say that, the links are not all burned between these two countries. Again, at the end of the day, the UAE does take in a sizable number of Pakistanis as expatriates. There are amongst Pakistan's leadership people who have invested within the UAE, especially in property and those aspects. So those doors of communication are open. But I think with Pakistan, the bigger challenge is how it's going to navigate within the situation. It seems to be banking a lot with mediation between the U.S. and Iran, but I would argue, and we argued this within our think tank, Kuwa, is that it has not given sufficient attention to Gulf security and making that the primary issue. And I think this is beginning to show with regards to the UAE.
What do you mean by Gulf security?
Yeah, so if you look historically in the 70s, 80s, the Gulf countries, whether it's Saudi Arabia, UAE, Qatar, They had relied on the Pakistani military in some respects, so especially in terms of manpower and personnel, but even to an extent, for example, having actual, combat-ready personnel within Saudi Arabia or within their territory as well. So Saudi Arabia was believed to have had a armored regiment from the Pakistan Army in part of the 80s. And what that meant was that no matter what would happen in the Gulf states, Pakistan would signal to them that if there was actual fighting, they would be there to help, and they would be that guarantor in that sense, like a source of a way of underwriting the security in the region. And in the 90s, when the Americans really stepped up their presence, that Pakistani security presence was unwinded quite a bit. However, especially in recent years, I think likely precipitated by Israel's strike in Qatar, there was a sense in the Gulf again that, hey, we need that partner who will be there with us on the ground. And that's where you have the Saudi defense agreement, for example. And now in regards to the Iran situation, you could argue that really, on the one hand, Pakistan's army leadership focused a lot on the mediation part, but we haven't seen much of any real, substantive on-the-ground signaling in terms of saying that, hey, we take the Gulf security seriously as well. That there are red lines that Iran should not cross. And I think that is where the UAE's criticism is really stemming from at the moment, is that, hey, are you there to help Iran's position, or are you there to help our position? And Saudi Arabia is sort of stuck in the middle here in trying to mediate that aspect. But that's the challenge that Pakistan actually faces in the long run, especially if this becomes a new normal and it does affect its economic security. At the same time, being quantitatively the biggest military in the region, outside of the U.S. presence, it had an opportunity, or maybe still does, to underwrite the security and leverage that for its economic gains.
Jean-Luc Racine, you were pointing out that that defense pact with Saudi Arabia is not yet ratified?
Yeah, it's not yet ratified. And that's explained also why Pakistan has been rather happy to see that Saudi Arabia has not reacted with a strong military push against Iran's threat, because even if it's not ratified, there are so many links. For decades now, Pakistani officers are counseling the Saudi forces. The various Pakistani prime ministers are going regularly to Saudi Arabia, not just for the Hajj pilgrimage. And there is something of a special relationship between Riyadh and Islamabad.
Like there used to be between the UAE and Islamabad.
Yes, but today it's a bit different. And one of the parameters also is how Pakistan can look at India expanded relationship with Gulf countries now. So it's a parameter which is probably not absolutely decisive. But of course, in any topic, as far as Pakistan's security and foreign policy is concerned, we must never forget.
India's never far from the minds. And let me ask you about this, Surbi Gupta, because you co-authored a piece today talking about Pakistani citizens in the Emirates. Tell us about it.
Yeah, so, we read about the loan repayment, but the UAE, perhaps as a punitive measure, and perhaps to hurt Pakistan in some way, has been deporting Pakistani Shia residents, including those who call the UAE home for the last over 2 decades, and a lot of migrant workers, and they've been arbitrarily detaining them, deporting them. People spoke to us about the mistreatment in the detention centers and how they were just put in flights with their ID cards canceled and bank accounts frozen, and they've just been sent back. And perhaps these are in thousands. A Shia leader told us that maybe 15,000 people have been deported.
15,000 people, and so what does that tell you? Is it squarely about the Iran war? What's it about?
Yeah, I think it's a part of that. Like the rift with the Saudi, Pakistan's closer, growing ties with Saudi, uh, and also like a muted response to the Iran war. So it's a part of that trend.
Part of that trend, and it brings us to the central question, which is how Pakistan found itself in the middle ever since the country nominated Donald Trump for a Nobel Peace Prize after Washington brokered a ceasefire over Kashmir with India last year, a mediation that Delhi denies. The Pakistanis have popped up where they're not expected, like, for instance, when Prime Minister Sharif gave one of the speeches at last October's Gaza peace signing in the Egyptian resort of Sharm el-Sheikh. Both Sharif and Field Marshal Asim Munir, the head of the military, have been invited to the White House, like last June. Here you see images from the White House press pool. Surbi Gupta, are you surprised that Pakistan finds itself in the middle?
Pakistan, before until last year was kind of struggling to kind of maintain its strategic relevance after the US withdrew from Afghanistan. But the, brief standoff with India really changed things for the country. Like you said, India was hesitant to acknowledge Trump's role in the ceasefire. And Pakistan, which was desperate for that opening, lapped up to that opportunity, flattered Trump, nominated him for the Nobel Peace Prize. After that, we saw Asim Munir and Shehbaz Sharif making multiple trips to Washington. So that relationship with Washington was not surprising. And also with Iran, it has close ties. And in a region where Iran has very few partners and people it can trust and communicate with, it became a situation and an opportunity for Pakistan to emerge as the mediator. And it also had a lot at stake domestically for it to kind of not enter the war directly. It could not afford to, so it had to kind of take on to that mediator role.
Bilal Khan, let's break it down into two here. First of all, the U.S. side. Remember Trump won? He did those joint campaign rallies with the Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi. Are you surprised that he bashed India with tariffs and sided with Pakistan, and now Pakistan finds itself as the mediator between the U.S. and Iran?
Not really. I mean, I think when we go back and look at the U.S., with the second Trump administration, they reapproached things at a very structural level. So the tariffs, they've inflicted tariffs on Canada. I'm in Canada. I see prices rise every day as well. Europe, it's been a global phenomenon or a global policy, right? And which reflects several years prior of U.S. policy, thinking. So that was coming one way or another. I think what has colored the conversation of the optics. So we have Trump being very warm and open with Pakistan's leaders, primarily Asim Munir and Shehbaz Sharif, and being, relatively speaking, colder with Modi. That being said, I think structurally Pakistan was always positioned to take on a role in any U.S.-Iran conflict. Fact is, the Chief of Army Staff, Asim Munir, Field Marshal, he was Director General of the ISI. He had connections. He had an open line with the IRGC. Once the senior leadership was wiped out by the Americans, I think America was hoping that Asim Munir and Pakistan could maybe establish links with the new IRGC leadership, which have not showed up to any of the talks or negotiations yet. And now Trump is calling out, saying that there's fragmented leadership within Iran. So I think at a structural level, the U.S. was always going to bank on Pakistan because at the end of the day, in a hot conflict situation like we have right now, an IRGC leadership is unlikely to show up in Turkey or the Gulf. They're going to show up. There are very few locations, so the closest would be Pakistan in that sense. Where it might be surprising is the business of the White House and what have you. But at the end of the day, we have to remember also Munir has to answer to people as well. and there will be the wider Pakistani security establishment who are going to be asking, so what are we getting out of these mediation talks? How is this affecting the economy? How is this affecting our fiscal capacity to deter India? And those questions are going to be very hard to answer unless other more structural things are dealt with, such as relations with the Gulf, and balancing those with regards to Iran. And obviously, I think from Pakistan's standpoint, or having stability in the Strait of Hormuz and allowing trade flows to flow back into, across to Pakistan and beyond is beneficial at one level, but there are always those structural economic problems that have always been there and have been compounded. With, for example, India has withdrawn from the Indus Water Treaty, so that's going to be a long-term economic security issue for Pakistan. So these are big questions that, unfortunately, the current leadership in Pakistan has not sufficiently answered. And it's not just from a, democratic, what have you. There are national security stakeholders within Pakistan, the ones who run the nuclear program, the ones who try to procure weapons from China to fight India, and all of these people, they're going to be asking the more hawkish questions. Like we saw in Iran, there's a hawkish element. Countries are run by different groups. It's no different in Pakistan.
Right, and as you mentioned, Asim Munir knows Iran well, knows its military leadership. As part of his recent visit to Tehran, we can show images. This is from April the 16th, just 9 days ago. He was touring the Khatam al-Anbiya Central Headquarters of the Revolutionary Guards. Jean-Luc Hassine, the relationship between Iran and Pakistan, it's a deep one. As was stated, the head of the military is also the former head of its intelligence service, the ISI.
So it's obviously an important parameter because it explains also beyond the flattery episode, which I think is important considering Donald Trump.
So there's flattery and there's intelligence.
Yeah, if we may say so, yes. But certainly, both from the American point of view and from the Iranian point of view, Pakistan was able to offer some reliable trust up to a point, because the question today is to know if what's the extent of the divide within the Iranian leadership, particularly with Pasdaran, and who are on a harder line than
So hang on, just to be clear, are you suggesting that the U.S. is counting on Pakistan to tell them whether they're speaking to the right interlocutors, or can the Americans do that on their own? They don't need the Pakistan.
No, I think it may go both ways. But the problem today, it seems, and we see that in the current media in Pakistan, where some analysts are saying, well, I mean, it was something of a feel-good moment, but some challenge remain, both internal, within Pakistan, and two, where all this will go as the second round of talk has not happened. And it seems that the divide within the Iranian leadership is still there. For instance, when during the first meeting in Islamabad, the foreign minister, Iranian foreign minister,
Abbas Araghchi,
said, well, we'll open Hormuz. But it was closed the next day because of Revolution Guardian. So it's a point which is not always easy, of course, to analyze. But for Pakistan, today the question is how much we can go it alone. And this is also why when Munir was in Tehran, the Prime Minister was in Saudi Arabia, and Pakistan is trying to, is some ways succeeding in building a kind of network between Pakistan, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, and Turkey. And we must not forget that the Pakistani Foreign Minister has also gone to Beijing, because China cannot be dismissed because obviously the Chinese strategy is to feel quiet, but they are there.
Well, we'll talk about China in a moment. Bashar al-Halabi, you're sitting in Doha, Qatar, which, over the last 10, 20 years has often been a go-to place when you needed a mediator, or certainly a nation that raised its hand, again, to be that, to play that facilitator role. What's the view on Pakistan trying to broker this deal? Is it seen positively or negatively?
Qatar, just like all the other GCC countries, even including Oman, they got hit. Obviously, the attacks, the level of attacks varied from one country to the other. But Qatar, in terms of its energy infrastructure, actually bore the brunt to an extent. Its LNG production capacity was hit, and the damage, according to the Qatari energy minister, Al-Kaabi, said it took out around 18% from their production capacity, which will take 3 to 5 years to repair. Now, the timeline can be a bit overextended, what he suggested, but it's still a huge blow to Qatar. And mind you, Qatar, who has always maintained excellent diplomatic relationships with neighboring Iran, also is suffering from the fact that the Strait of Hormuz is blocked for Qatari LNG carriers. So the statements and the messaging coming out of the Qatari Foreign Ministry is that, yes, it's true, we have always been mediators. Our doors are open for basically all conflicts around the world for us to try and play a role in mediating and in crisis management. But this time we cannot really play this role because we are being directly attacked by Iran. This has been the messaging out of Qatar. And I think all the other countries, to varying degrees, agree to this. Yes, some do agree to, or some do push for diplomacy more than maybe military action. But everyone, anyway, has been under attack from the Iranians in general. Now, what's striking to me is that over the past week or two, almost all the Gulf countries have received calls from, except maybe Bahrain and Kuwait, but Qatar, the UAE, and Saudi Arabia have received calls from the Iranian foreign minister, and there has been some diplomatic talks on that end. We still don't know to what extent. We don't know if this is the foreign ministry saying one thing, but the IRGC thinking something other. And we've seen that also the foreign minister has visited Oman and has visited Russia in previous days, which raises also a question to the Islamabad mediation track in general. How effective is this track will continue to be? President Trump has mentioned that they're not going to take another or more 18-hour flights as the U.S. delegation to go and negotiate there. He mentioned that the Iranians have their phone numbers and they can call them. So the question now is not whether Gulf countries want to be mediators. It's more of whether Islamabad is still a mediation venue or avenue in general between the warring sides.
Bashar, do you think Islamabad will come to regret having set up the mediation?
I can't speak of Islamabad. I think the other guests have talked a lot about their country. But as they mentioned, there's one important observation is that Islamabad is not just doing this for the sake of the planet. Islamabad has its own challenges, and it was banking on this role and the Trump relationship in order to leverage that into other, whether aid, whether support, whether, all of these things. It finds itself in a precarious economic situation, and this has been the case for quite some time now. And this is why Islamabad maybe, or perhaps tried to stay on the fence in this conflict. I was monitoring the Prime Minister's Twitter account, and he never condemned any attack on Gulf countries, which is why relationships might have soured, or he never really called out Iran when he condemned those attacks, which is why maybe Gulf countries and capitals, some of them are upset about this. But yeah, there's a lot at stake for Islamabad specifically and for the economic challenges over there. And this is why it's putting all its balls in this one basket of mediation.
Jean-Luc Racine, the Pakistanis, as we said earlier in the conversation, cash-strapped. This closing of the Strait of Hormuz is terrible timing for them, for the population which is suffering. Is it kind of like when people made fun of the French President Emmanuel Macron for going to Moscow and sitting at the long table with Vladimir Putin to try to prevent the war with Ukraine? They said you looked ridiculous, and he said, look, you got to try everything. You have to try. You have to try. Is that how we should look at Pakistan's attempts?
Oh, certainly. I mean, for both the civilian and the military authorities in Islamabad, suddenly there was an opportunity to change their image because now you see some comments saying, well, we can become some sort of a regional security provider, which is not exactly the traditional image in Pakistan in the region, including in Washington. So the moment was to say, but now some questions are asked in Pakistan itself because no one knows really what will happen now.
Yeah, and you mentioned earlier how Pakistan has issues on several fronts. We've talked about the age-old border tensions over Kashmir with India. When the United States and Israel attacked Iran on February 28th, the world was actually looking at another fire to put out, the on-again, off-again escalating fighting between Afghanistan and its neighbor Pakistan. Here are images from this past Monday. Civilians had to flee the Pakistani border town of Chamam City on the road that links Quetta to Kandahar in Afghanistan. For its part, the Pakistanis deny shelling a university in the eastern city of Abbottabad. The UN confirms civilian casualties in Kunar province. So, Bilal Khan, let's just remind our viewers here. There's an energy crunch. There's the tensions that are never far from the surface with India. And now there's Afghanistan as well?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's worth, calling out again, like, that Pakistan has trouble coming towards long-term political solutions. Like, let's put India to the side. Let's say there's a bigger, more, structural problem there. Fair enough. But with regards to Afghanistan, you have like literal common families, tribes on the Pakistan-Afghanistan border. They've been moving back and forth between those two for generations. And suddenly there's been this upsurge in securitization. And obviously, there's instability, tensions, what have you, and militant non-state activity. But again, with Pakistan, the trouble we have is that we don't get a lot of information on how things are being done. We don't have a lot of, let's say, outside of a few people within the security leadership, outside of them, we don't have many perspectives of how to solve these problems in a fair and just manner. And obviously, until a proper long-term solution that is native to the region's realities and dynamics, whether it's culturally, religiously, geographically, is actually agreed upon and implemented, these tensions are going to remain and they're going to be there perpetually because we've seen that, for now decades, I mean, at least since I've been alive, there's always been some sort of conflict involving Pakistan and Afghanistan in some capacity, whether it's against different tribes, different non-state actors, or even like an Afghan government, for example, whether it was the Karzai era, Ghani, and now you have the Taliban. So clearly, like the common denominator here is the border, the situation between the two capitals, and something deeper that just hasn't been addressed. And that's one challenge. The other challenge is that I would also caution and highlight that since the Indo-Pak conflict in May 2025, and ever since Asim Munir and Shehbaz Sharif, visited the White House, I think Pakistan has intentionally fashioned itself as a bit of a, it's what we call looking west. So basically, fashioned itself as a bit of a security player within its westward border. So whether that's Afghanistan, the Middle East, and the Gulf, and sort of been trying to present that image as well. So part of the action in Afghanistan could also be framed in that lens as well, to an extent. Definitely, again, there's been cross-border fights and conflicts between the two sides for years before that. But the fact is that we've seen intentional very vocal policy play from Pakistan's side to say that, okay, we are also focused on, securing Afghanistan in America's absence. We want to assert ourselves as a security player within the Gulf, and all these different factors. So part of it could also be, Pakistan's security leadership, especially Field Marshal Asim Shabazri, trying to present themselves as a certain type of actor or player within the region that could be amenable to American interests as well. And that should also be kept in mind. I mean, it's not something out of character for Pakistan's leadership.
All right, so beware of the possibility of, at least, of hubris. Surbhi Gupta, also there's the question, since you're sitting in New York City, how hard is it to keep the Trump administration on board? You heard Jean-Luc Racine saying flattery won't get you so far.
Yeah, I mean, you never know with Trump and the Trump administration, Trump has a mind of his own, and things could change one doesn't know, things could change. Today, Pakistan is in the good books, tomorrow something may happen. And there is the sense that perhaps this good relations perhaps will last until this administration. Maybe there will be a reset after. It is to be seen, with things changing so quickly.
All right, and finally, it was touched upon just briefly earlier, the United States is 2 oceans away from Pakistan. On its border is another superpower, the one that everyone thought would call time on the war between the U.S. and Iran. We're talking about China, that Donald Trump will be visiting in a couple of weeks' time. Pakistan's President Asif Ali Zardari, seen here, visiting factories and potential investors in Hunan Province's Shanga City. These images put out today courtesy of Chinese television. You were mentioning Jean-Luc Racine. On this set, right after February 28th, everybody said at one point China's going to do something, and that's what's going to end the war between the U.S. and Iran. So far, it hasn't happened.
What happened openly was China mediation between Pakistan and Afghanistan. It was in early April in Xinjiang for several days. But on the US-Iran or the Gulf War, to call it like that, it seems, of course, that Beijing is extremely careful. But we may believe that not totally inactive, because we have to remember that, of course, there is extremely close relation between Islamabad and Beijing, but there is also close relation between Tehran and Beijing.
Bashar al-Habi, we're out of time, so just in one sentence, do you see this being wrapped up before Donald Trump goes to Beijing? So far, the visit is still on.
It's either that, he might be hoping for that, or it's going to be the elephant in the room when he lands in Beijing and meets with Xi Jinping.
All right, we'll have to leave it there. Thank you so much for being with us from Doha. I want to thank as well Bilal Khan in Toronto, Surbhi Gupta in New York City, Jean-Luc Racine. Thank you for being with us here in the France 24 debate.